Our recording just started. Thank you for joining our information session for the Community Green Infrastructure Grant Program. I'm just going to get started. You can put questions in the chat if you like, or you can ask them directly once I'm done with the presentation. So I am going to share my screen here so you can see my slide presentation. Let's see, just a second. And can everyone see the slides? You can just, all right, great. Okay, so this is an information session. We also have drop-in sessions every Tuesday. So make sure to use those if you have additional questions. I just wanted to go over the outline. We'll cover the program purpose, some basic information, the grant categories, allocation requirements, program priorities for all projects, special requirements for green infrastructure projects, the online application and tips. I'm not going to go through in this time because we just don't have enough time, every single thing you might need to know. This is the highlights, some things that you should be aware of, based a lot on some of the questions we've already been getting. For complete information, read the call for applications. That is where you will get everything that you need. So the program purpose, this is a community green infrastructure grant program, and it helps fund production of native seeds and plants, create and implement green infrastructure master plans, and carry out community green infrastructure projects that provide direct social, environmental, and economic benefits to communities throughout Oregon. In this presentation, we're really going to be focusing more on the community green infrastructure projects, simply because that's the category that has the most complex requirements. Just some basic information. Again, this is in the call for applications. The application period is open. It closes December 2nd. We plan to announce awards in January and then work through the grant agreements in February and March. The large grant category is $100,000 to $500,000, and the small grants $5,000 to $100,000. Actually, that should probably be $99,999. There's no match requirement, so you don't have to worry about that. It is possible that this could serve as a match for other grants that you have, but it would be the applicant's responsibility to determine that. And then the application will be online, or is online, and we'll be touching on that a little bit toward the end of the presentation. So the grant categories, this program was authorized and funded through House Bill 3409. At this point in time, it's a one-time allocation. We do hope that it will be renewed, but for the time being, it is a pot of $6.5 million for community green infrastructure projects. That's the first grant category. Green infrastructure economic development projects, which is similar to the community green infrastructure projects, and I'll talk about the difference between those two. Native seed banks and native plant nurseries, and green infrastructure master plans. First, I want to talk about an allocation directive. I believe in the call for applications, we refer to this as a requirement, but I want to get away from the term requirement because this is not a requirement for applicants. This is a directive from the legislature that of the money in this fund, at least 30% go to green infrastructure and economic development projects, at least 40% go to projects in green infrastructure improvement zones, and at least 30% for projects in tribal, rural, remote, or coastal communities. And you might say, well, how can it be at least? That, you know, could add up to more than 100. That's correct, because these are not exclusive allocation requirements. They could overlap. For example, a project could be it could be an economic development project, and it could also be in a green infrastructure improvement zone. So something important to take into account for this, these are not, this directive is not for applicants, it's for us. We have to make sure that a certain amount of the funds goes into each of these allocations. And there are no requirements for applicants associated with this allocation directive. If you want to, you can ignore it completely. The reason why we included it in our call for applications, and the reason why we're talking about it, is for transparency, just so everybody knows that we do have this directive that we have to meet. And also because it might impact what types of projects some applicants propose. In many cases, it won't, but in some cases it might. And an example could be, for example, if you are thinking of doing a project in a city where there happen to be green infrastructure improvement zones, you might choose one neighborhood over another simply because it is in that zone. Or if you were thinking of doing a green infrastructure, a green infrastructure project, and realized, oh, well, there's this allocation directive for economic development projects, which are projects that hire the people who benefit from the project to do the work. So you might change the way your project is structured in order to hire those projects. This directive will only impact grant award decisions if we don't get enough high scoring applications to meet it. So if we get lots of high scoring applications that fall into all of these, it will not change a thing. If we don't get enough high scoring applications to meet this directive, then we may have to elevate some projects that otherwise wouldn't have been chosen in order to meet this. So that's the only area where it will have an impact on our decisions. So just to repeat, the allocation requirements are not eligibility criteria. They do not impact whether you're able to apply or not, and they are not grant categories. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So now I did want to, I mentioned green infrastructure improvement zones, and so I'd like to go to our website. Oops, that's right here, to show you where you can find those. So this is our website. And in grant categories and maps, there's a little drop down, and the maps for the green infrastructure improvement zones and the coastal, rural, and remote areas are on this page. And if you click on the image, so this image actually, this map is not terribly detailed. So this is the rural and remote areas in green and the coastal areas in blue. This is the map where you really need more detail. And the green infrastructure improvement zones are the pink areas. So I can zoom in on Portland, which has quite a few of them, which is a combination of low income and low tree canopy and low nature. And then in addition, every Title I school is, just the campus itself is a green infrastructure improvement zone. So those are these purple dots. So, you know, if you thought that, you know, if you wanted to make a decision about where to do a project, and you wanted to make sure you did it in a green infrastructure improvement zone, you can take a look at this map and zoom in to where your project might be. And you can see that there are Title 1A schools all over the state, but the green infrastructure improvement zones are mostly in some of the more urban areas. So here's one in Redmond. There are a bunch in Eugene, Springfield. So that's where that map is. So let's go back to the slides. So I wanted to just briefly go over the program priorities. I'm not going to read through all of these. Again, these are in the call for applications, but these are applicable to all the grant categories. They were established by the legislature, and they are not requirements. However, projects that address one or more of these priorities will score higher. So it is not expected that a project meet all of these. In fact, I don't even know if that would be possible. But the more of these that a project meets, the higher it will score. So now I'd like to go into the requirements for community green infrastructure projects and green infrastructure economic development projects, and talk about some of the special requirements that these two sets of categories have. So one is that they both have to consult with the local government where the project will be located. In the case of tribes, that doesn't apply because the tribe would be the applicant for tribal land, and with the electric and water utilities in whose service territory the project will be located. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, more about that in the next slide, because this is a really important one. Has to be located completely in Oregon, must provide social, environmental, and/or economic benefits to an environmental justice community, must be developed in coordination with an environmental justice community that will benefit from the project. And again, this isn't applicable to tribes. I'm going to talk about this one more in a bit. Have a minimum 3-year maintenance plan or have requested technical assistance for maintenance planning. And then an additional requirement for the economic development projects is that it's the same as a regular green infrastructure project, except that it has to employ members of a community that benefits from the project in the development, construction, planting, or maintenance. So all of those things. So it doesn't mean that the community members necessarily have to plant, although that would fulfill this requirement. Maybe you have a professional planting crew, and then you have local residents do the maintenance, but they would have to be paid. So employ is an important word here. So now I'm going to talk about some of these special requirements for green infrastructure projects. And the local consultation form, which is on our website, is one that I cannot emphasize enough that you need to start on this right away. You must, and this is required in the legislation that created this program, you must solicit feedback from the local government where the project will happen, from the electric utility, and from the water utility where the project will happen. You must incorporate that feedback into your application or explain why you didn't. And if you do not hear a response back from any of those entities within 30 days, then you don't need to incorporate feedback because you didn't get any feedback. But we would need to see proof that you reached out to them and didn't hear back in 30 days. So that could be like an email attachment where you make a copy of your email and say, I didn't hear back in 30 days. This is a form, it's a PDF. It will be uploaded onto the application website, and there's a limit. The text boxes have limits, so this is not supposed to be long form essays, so please try to keep your answers limited to the space available, if at all possible. So yeah, I just wanted to, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get started on this right away. Another requirement is coordination with an environmental justice community that will benefit from the project. The definition of environmental justice community comes from statute, and it is in the call for applications, and it's on this slide as well. And that is not a form, it's just a question on the application. And I will note, it's not required to have letters of support from the environmental justice community, but it would be a big help if you do. It will certainly benefit an application to have letters of support. So again, you don't have to write all this down. It is in the call for applications. And then geographic guidance. This is really important to look at. I've gotten quite a few questions from potential projects that might be good, but they're in the wrong place. So the intent of this program, the Community Green Infrastructure Program, is to provide direct benefits to a community of people. It is not intended for wilderness areas or purely natural conservation projects. Now, if a natural conservation project is occurring in a city, say, and will benefit people, then that is fine. But if it's out in a wilderness area, not close to where people live, then that is not the intent of this program. There are other programs that can fund those types of projects. So the guidance that we have is that community green infrastructure projects and green infrastructure economic development projects should be within city limits or urban growth boundaries, or in an urban or rural unincorporated community, or on tribal reservation or trust land. Now, if it's not inside any of those areas and you think that your project still meets this intent of providing direct benefits to a community of people, then you have to explain how it does that. And an example of this might be, and I've gotten questions like this too, where somebody wants to do a project that is immediately outside the city limits and might be immediately outside the urban growth boundary, but it is directly adjacent to a neighborhood. So that is an example where potentially the project could provide those direct benefits even though it's outside one of those boundaries. Okay, moving on to the next section, web grants. So this is the page that you will arrive to when you click on the link that's on our website to get to our online application portal. And the provider for that is Web Grants. Now, do not be alarmed that in the URL for that link, for this page, you will see the Department of Forestry, and you will also see the Department of Forestry logo. The reason for that is because we are sharing resources with the Oregon Department of Forestry. So it will have their logo, but when you go in and register and look at the grant opportunities, you will see our grant opportunity there. You will also see Forestry's grant opportunity for the Urban and Community Forestry Program. So note that many people who are interested in DLCD's green infrastructure grants are also interested in the Department of Forestry's Inflation Reduction Act urban and community forestry grants. And so if you have already registered for their funding opportunity, you do not have to register again. You're all set. If you log in, now you will see both funding opportunities. So when you log in, this is the page you'll see, and you'll want to click on funding opportunities. And that will take you to this page, and you'll see both the Department of Forestry's opportunity and hours now. So I'm not going to do a full walkthrough of web grants. I think that it's pretty make sure you read the instructions. And I think that it's pretty intuitive once you start using it. But if you have any trouble, absolutely come to our drop-in hours, or also you can set up a one-on-one meeting with me. So to round up the presentation, and then we'll use the balance of the time for questions. I just have some tips. Read the call for applications. If you have questions, please do this before you contact us with questions. The information on our website is not enough to give you all the information you need. You really have to read the call for applications. Start, as I said before, start the local consultation and the environmental justice community coordination right away. Use our application template on our website to prepare your application. There's a link on our actually there are 2 links on our website for that document. It is a Word document. Please do not send it to us. That is not how you submit your application. It is simply a tool to help you prepare your application. And you will, in that template, you'll have all the questions that you'll see that you'll need to answer. Check back for a living FAQ as we get questions in. We are compiling an FAQ, and that will go up next week, but it will be continually updated as we get more and more questions in. And then we'll also be doing a budget guidance document, and that will help you understand our budget categories. So you will be entering your budget into web grants as line items, and then we will have some guidance to talk about the budget categories and what should go in those. Read our announcements. So you can check back on our website for these things, but we'll also be sending announcements when those are posted on our website. And so I assume that most, if not everyone on this call is probably signed up for our email list. If you aren't, please sign up, and then you will get our announcements. We won't be flooding your inboxes, but we will send out announcements when they're needed. Use our drop-in office hours. Now, I understand that those are set for the same time every week, which might be inconvenient for some people. So if they are inconvenient for you, you can absolutely reach out to us to set up a one-on-one meeting. And if I hadn't said it before, read the call for applications. And the reason why I've said this many, many times is because I've gotten a lot of questions that had people read the call for applications first, they probably wouldn't have needed to ask them. And that's it. So now I'd like to open up for questions. You can unmute and pipe up and ask a question. Feel free to do that, absolutely. If you'd like to raise your hand, that's fine too. And then if you had a question in the chat, Elliot will be managing those. So yeah, we've got a little over half an hour for questions. Well, I like to think that silence means I was super clear.
Laura, do you want me to start with the registration and then chat, and then maybe that will answer some questions to begin with, and then we can see if people have more from there.
Okay, sure.
All right, first one from the registration was, what types of activities are covered, and if this grant will be offered again?
So, okay, you said that was from registration or from the chat? Registration. Okay.
Registration.
Yeah. So, the activities that are covered depends on what grant opportunity, what grant category someone is interested in. So if it's a community green infrastructure project or economic development project, those are green infrastructure projects. And green infrastructure is defined in statute. We actually have two definitions, one that is in another part of statute, ORS 550-160, which is an older definition, and then there's a new definition which was included in the legislation that created this program. And so we basically combine those two definitions, and they're right on the first page of the call for applications. So if your green infrastructure project is any of the things that qualifies as green infrastructure, then it's eligible. Keep in mind that a successful application will also hit on the program priorities. So even if it's eligible as green infrastructure, it won't be a strong application unless it also hits the program priorities. And then, of course, there are the seed banks and native plant nurseries and the master plans. And one thing I'd note about the master plans is not just making a new plan, it's also implementing a plan. So if you have an existing plan and there are elements of it that you haven't been able to implement, this program could fund some of the implementation of that plan. So don't just think that it's a new plan. We could also, it's also possible to amend an existing plan. So say you have an existing plan of any sort. It could be your comprehensive plan, it could be your stormwater management plan, could be a parks plan, could be many different types of plans. If you wanted to amend it to add green infrastructure elements into that plan, that is also eligible. So yeah, if you have specific questions about what types of projects might be eligible, I think that and you really want to talk through them, one of the drop-in hours would be good. And then Elliot, what was the other part of that question?
The second part was if this grant will be offered again.
Yeah, so if we grant all the money in this round, then we will not do a second round. I do expect that we probably will do a second round, which will open in 2025, and we will let everybody know when that second round occurs. If the program is not renewed with the legislature, then we will simply grant money and do rounds until all the money is up, and then that will be the end. If it is renewed by the legislature, then yes, it will be an annual offering, and you'll have more chances.
Next question from registration is, do we have any examples of small projects?
So because this is a brand new program, we do not have any examples of projects that have been funded by this program because no projects have yet been funded. However, in the call of applications, we did provide lots of examples of the types of projects that could occur in certain grant categories. And those are just examples that we came up with to help people imagine what types of projects they could do. So I encourage you to look at those examples, but it's not limited to that. Those are just some things that we came up with.
Third question is on the registration was put in by someone who's in the meeting now. I don't want to call out names if people don't want to come off mute, but this would be the time. If you would like to be a little bit more specific, it says partnerships with Title 1A schools. But that's all the information in this. If you want to come off mute or put a little bit more information in the chat, we can deal with that one.
So I would say, a I don't know what is meant by partnership with a Title I-A school. If the project is not on the campus of the Title I-A school, then it would not qualify as being in a green infrastructure improvement zone. So I don't know if that helps clarify.
Moving on to the next one. Interested in the seed bank slash nursery category.
Okay, so the seed bank slash nursery category is does not have the extensive requirements, specific requirements that the green infrastructure projects have. And we will be basing our decisions, our ranking decisions essentially of applicants in that category, well, for seed banks and nurseries, on how well they meet program priorities. Now you might say, well, okay, there's a program priority of plantings that include native plants or pollinator friendly species. And they might say, well, we're not doing plantings, we're producing. And so for native seed banks and nurseries, in terms of meeting the program priorities, what you need to think about is what you're producing, whether that helps meet those program priorities in the future. So if you are producing large, low maintenance, storm and drought resistant trees, and when I say large, I mean that they'll be large when they're mature, then you are helping meet that priority because you're making that available to future projects. If you are that's the first two of those, and the plantings, native plants and pollinator friendly species, and then also having a long-term agreement with a city would also be a plus on that side. But yeah, we're mostly looking at whether the seed banks and nurseries will help achieve the program priorities. Sarah, you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I have two questions. One is the form that you have for the consult with the city, utility, underserved. Do you want is that just for us to easily send to them, or do you want that form filled out by them as part of the application?
Yeah, so that form should be filled out by the applicant.
Okay.
I don't think a city is going to want to fill that out. Yeah, it's just a format to, we had it be separate so that we could really get it out to people early and they could see it and they could start filling it out. The other thing I would note that I didn't mention on that form, and this is not required in the legislation, but there is a page for projects that involve plantings in ODOT right-of-way. You don't have to consult with them, but you are required to contact them, to notify them.
Okay.
And so the last page, if you're planning a project in ODOT right-of-way, you have to confirm that you notified them. And again, you fill that out, but you have to put down who you notified and when you notified them. And it's just sort of checking that box, and that will start a process likely with them, which, you don't have to show us that process, but that process does have to get underway.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Oh yeah. Can I ask my second question?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. The green stormwater infrastructure improvement area. My project is one block outside of that. Was that still something that will be in the running, or should I find a different project?
So again, this is not an, you're talking about the green infrastructure improvement zone?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And those, if people are wondering why they look the way they do, they are based on census tracts. Actually, both of the maps are based on census tracts. So that's the way that our data worked. That was really the only feasible way to do it. And so, yeah, if it's not in the zone, then it wouldn't count as being in the zone. But it doesn't mean you can't do the project because it's not an eligibility criterion.
Thank
But
you.
if you,
That clears it up.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure, Neil.
Thank you. I also have two questions following on Sarah's lead. The first one is really looking at the program priorities and where do you see other forms of green infrastructure that are not trees fitting in, like things like other types of stormwater treatment facilities, permeable pavement, retrofitting gray infrastructure that has no treatment to add stormwater detention and treatment facilities, whether they be bioswales or other types of stormwater infrastructure. Where do those fit into this type of project is the first question.
Yeah, so if it meets the definition of green infrastructure, then it is eligible. That doesn't mean that it will score high because the program has certain types of projects that it prioritizes, and those are listed in the program priorities. So, if you can't hit any of the program priorities, again, they're not required, but you just might not score as high. And I can't tell you whether that means you would be funded or not.
But of course not.
Yeah.
But I guess to reframe the question, if we were taking a outfall that predates 1993 and has no treatment whatsoever, and constructing, let's say for argument's sake, a series of bioswales that included native plants and pollinator-friendly species, that would hit that priority.
It would. And if you included tree plantings, it would hit another priority. Yeah. And just just for some background, as this legislation was getting underway in the, as when it was being developed, it was called colloquially the Trees Act. And so from the beginning, the idea was that it would be not exclusively about trees, and it's not, but that is absolutely a focus of it, and intentionally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the second question was really, I was just curious about the rationale for that real emphasis on the coordination with utilities. Is that just to increase conflicts around power lines with tree plantings? Is that the main intent of that?
Or decrease. Yeah,
Yeah.
decrease. Yeah. Yeah, so that is in the legislation. It's required by the legislation. And the idea is that when there is activity in an urban area, there are just a lot of opportunities for conflicts with different utilities. And so the idea is to avoid that. I mean, if you were to do, say, a big tree planting, like a street tree planting, then it turned out that the water utility was going to replace a water main next year in that exact location, that would be unfortunate. And had there been coordination before that, then maybe a different location could have been selected, or a different date for planting, that sort of thing. So it's really intended to increase chances for survival of the project and decrease conflicts.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Elliot, you're muted if you're talking.
Sorry, I thought yeah, wow. I'll continue on for the next one from the registration. I don't see this person in chat in the meeting, so I guess, yeah, project examples, but
Yeah, again, because this is the first round ever, we don't have existing project examples. What we do have are the ones that we dreamed up to help people out in the call for applications, but those are by no means the only types of projects that could happen. Steve.
Hi there.
Hi.
Sorry, I have baby here, so if you hear
That's
some loud
okay.
noise, that's okay. My question is about the green infrastructure master plans, and I just want to confirm that what I see is correct in the call for proposals, that you do have to be a public body to have that, and or a tribal entity. Is that correct?
Correct.
So then we're a nonprofit in rural Southwest Oregon. We have 800-acre ranch that we've been restoring and converting to public land. And we're partnering with some tribal groups in our region to design for cultural burns and for First Foods, 140-acre meadow conversion project. Would design on that project be covered in the green infrastructure section, or does that kind of fit with this?
Right. So one of the so for green infrastructure projects, this category, and I'm reading from the call for applications.
Yep.
This category provides funds for offsetting the cost of planning and developing. So it doesn't have to be just putting plants in the ground. It can also be the cost of planning.
So this would be, we're basically putting together a full design for both restoration and for a master plan for the campus facility that's connected to this area. So does that need to be broken out separately? Some of our federal partners we've worked with on the restoration side just want restoration dollars in one bucket. But I just want to be clear, if I put together a proposal for this, would we put together for the full plan, or just focus on the meadow restoration and the planning of the trail network through that 140 acres?
I mean, it might be good to have a one-on-one conversation with you.
Okay.
I mean, it sounds like maybe you're doing two things. I would urge you to take a look at the geographic guidance, because it sounds like perhaps the area that you're looking at wouldn't meet that. But I don't know if you have tribal land in there or not.
So if it's in the rural zone, it's not eligible. Is that what you're saying? I thought there was something about rural in there that was a 30% priority.
So that's, yeah, that is confusing, isn't it? Rural, so they're different. The definition of rural is, well, there's not just one definition of rural, which is very confusing, I know, and we have spent, you can't even imagine how long talking about how to define rural.
Yeah.
In a land use context, rural is what you're thinking. Rural is resource land in a land use context. So when the Department of Land Conservation and Development talks about rural, it's talking about ag land.
Okay.
In other contexts, rural also means small towns. It's a region that is rural. And so we combined rural and remote and defined certain areas, and it's actually the bulk of the state, in the state, that are rural and remote. But it doesn't mean that any place in that entire rural and remote area would be eligible for green infrastructure projects. So yeah, the geographic guidance still applies. But if you happen to be a city, an incorporated city, or an unincorporated
We're unincorporated in the
rural,
county.
but an unincorporated rural community, which is a settlement that is designated, then you could be eligible. And Matt, it looks like maybe you want to chime in.
Just noticing we do have kind of a catch-all in our geographic, because it has to be a community oriented, but we said if it's not in the city, talk to us about how it's providing that direct benefit to a community.
Okay.
And I could imagine maybe this might, I could imagine it maybe not. So I don't want to make speculation.
Okay. Sounds like maybe I can reach out on email and follow up for a one-on-one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Sure.
I'm going to do the last one from registration because I realized the other people asking questions are not in attendance in the meeting. So let's try to speed along so we can get to the meeting chat because there's some good questions in there. Last one from registration is wondering if assistance with a biosolid dryer system would qualify.
If that person who asked that question is on the call right now, please reach out directly so we can talk about that one.
All right, moving on to chat. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here, but I have a couple questions from Valerie that sound like they are semi-related. Do you want to just ask the question via mic, Valerie? Or if not, I can read them.
Sure. Thanks so much. I'm just following up on this question about the geographic requirements. So the coastal region doesn't seem to have any particular green infrastructure zones, except for some Title 1A schools. So I'm wondering if coastal projects would only be considered if they are projects with the schools shown on the map.
Okay, so remember that the allocation requirements have absolutely zero to do with eligibility. So they don't have anything to do with eligibility. If, in fact, we could have rolled this program out without telling anyone ever about the allocation requirements, because that's something we have to figure out. Applicants don't have to worry about them. The reason that we decided to let people know about those is just so that people would understand how we might be making our decisions, because some projects that are in one of those allocation directives might get a leg up depending on what applications we get, but they don't determine whether you're eligible or not. So if you are doing a project in a coastal zone, then we will note, if we approve the project, we'll note, X dollars went to this allocation directive, and then we know that, so much money went to that, but it's not something you ever see. But if you want to have the possibility possibly of having a little bit of a bump on your application, and it may or may not be a bump, it depends on what we get, then you could say do a project at a Title 1A school.
Okay, sorry, I just want to clarify, because my question was not about the allocation directives. It was about the geographic requirements. So
what geographic requirement?
Are you saying that the maps that were included, those are part of the allocation directives? No. Can you explain the role of the maps and how projects work?
The maps only have to do with the allocation directive.
Okay, perfect.
With one exception, and that is that coastal, rural, and remote areas are included in the definition of environmental justice community. So if you're doing a green infrastructure, and I'm sorry this is so complex, we tried to make it as simple as possible, but we had the legislation to work with. if you are doing a community green infrastructure project or green infrastructure economic development project, one of the requirements is that you coordinate with an environmental justice community. Well, coastal is an environmental justice community. So if you're on the coast, you would coordinate with the people who live there, and that qualifies as an environmental justice community. So that's the only exception. Otherwise, the maps are just for the allocation directives. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. And again, I'm sorry this is convoluted.
No problem.
Marianne?
Hi, yeah, so following up on Valerie's, sorry about the lighting here. I'll
No,
turn
it's
that
okay.
off. Following up on Valerie's question, so could we get like multiple bonus points for different communities? So like if we're a project in a coastal community working with a Spanish-speaking community-based organization to plant trees with youth and seniors, could we like get multiple bonus points? Does that make any sense?
Yes. So, again, the allocation directive doesn't give points because that's not yeah, that one doesn't give points. But I'm just trying to see so for the requirements for the community green infrastructure projects, you will be given points based on the answers to those requirements. So one of them is that it must provide social, environmental, and economic benefits to an environmental justice community. And if you happen to be providing those benefits to many environmental justice communities, then that your answer to that question may earn you more points than if it was just one. So
great, thank you. It makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Next question. Is there a grant amount that they like? Is there a grant amount that they are we more likely to fund? Do we want to fund large projects or many small ones?
So again, because this is the first round, we don't have experience on which to base an answer to that question. But I would say we want quality projects that meet as many program objectives as possible. So, you know, our decision-making matrix does not include whether a project is large or small, except that they're the two categories. So it doesn't factor in. The quality of the project is what factors in.
Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned that award announcements would be made in early 2025. Do you know how quickly the funds will be available? And is there a deadline for when funds need to be spent?
Yeah, so funds will be available when the grant agreements are signed. And the call for applications says that the project must be completed no later than 18 months after the execution of the grant agreement. And actually, we were recently talking after some questions came up from a potential applicant. We will be amending that in the call for applications to say or otherwise agreed to in the grant agreement, because there's some potentially good projects that might not be able to get started right away. And might have enough of a delay that 18 months after signing might not be enough. So, you know, we're flexible on that. We don't want things that drag out forever. And then I will say that time extensions may be possible, but it's entirely at the discretion of staff, and an applicant would need to show that significant progress is going on in order to get an extension, and there would need to be a justification for that.
Is there a limit to the number of applications by a single applicant?
No.
In the call for applications, it sounded like applications might be reviewed anytime after early October. Is there any perceived benefit to getting applications submitted earlier than the December deadline?
Oh, actually, I'd be curious to know what makes it seem like they would be reviewed, because that was unintentional if it made it seem like that. No, they won't be reviewed until we get them all in on December 2nd.
Any specific guidance related to priorities within rural and coastal priority areas on second map?
So those aren't priority areas. Those are areas that a certain percentage has to go into, and it's not just rural and coastal, it's also tribal, which we did not map tribal because we didn't have we simply didn't have the data to map that. No, the program priorities are the same for all grant categories and all geographic areas.
I believe we've run out of questions other than the biosolids question. If you want to answer that now, or if I missed any, my apologies, and please put up your hands in the meeting room.
Okay, yeah, the biosolids question, I would prefer to talk to whoever had that question so we can talk about the details.
Sorry, there's one more that just came in. Can an application be part of a larger project, for example, a rehabilitation of a whole public park, including paving, playground, etc., but just submit for the green infrastructure part of the project?
Yes, in fact, we do expect that to be the case. So we would not pay for things that are not green infrastructure, but I fully expect, I mean, I've gotten questions about this and seen some example projects of projects at schools, for example, that have playgrounds, but they also have tree planting and some other green infrastructure, and we would pay for that part of it. And I think that's a great thing to fund. So yeah, I do expect that we'll have a lot of projects where we only fund a part of a much larger project.
We have reached the end of the questions in chat, so unless anyone has some raised hands, I believe that concludes what we need to follow up on, other than on the side.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. It looks like we're ending right on time, which is great. And again, I know questions will come up as you move through your applications or you're trying to get things pulled together. So do use our drop-in sessions and do reach out to us individually. We really want everyone to be set up to be successful. Justin.
Hey, can you show that screen one more time? I was trying to screenshot it. Your last screen that you had all of the final notes.
The final, oh, the tips?
Yeah, the tips.
Okay, yes, I will do that. Okay. So these are the tips.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing it.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Okay. Cool. Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for joining us. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.